Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Really glad you could join us here today for our webinar. I'm Chris Lynch. I'm the acting CEO at Alzheimer Disease International. Really is a delight to be able to host this webinar. It's my third time as acting CEO. It's been an absolute privilege to work with you all over the last 6 months. Um, Jane, next slide, please. And we are totally straddling our time zones today as well. Just on the panel, we have people at 6 a.m. right through to 10 p.m. I know some of you are joining us out of work hours, so we really appreciate that. And a number of you are watchers online afterwards as well. And we have 1,500 and more registered for the webinar today, which for me just resonates greatly in terms of the theme and the topic that we're focusing on with our colleagues at WHO and that of risk reduction and implementation. So just a little bit about ADI, for those of you that aren't familiar with us. We've been going for over 40 years now, and we're the umbrella organization for Alzheimer's and dementia. We have members in 105 countries, some of them represented here today, plus 20 more countries in our development program as well. We're in official relations with the WHO, and we represent our member associations at the UN, at OECD, and all of the regional bodies as well. You probably know us best for our activities, including World Alzheimer Month, which is coming up in September, and the World Alzheimer Report, etc. And next slide, please, Jane. Also, we are a charitable organization, so always a good opportunity for us to ask if you are in the position to do so, to make a contribution, or to direct anybody to us that you know might, and please scan the QR code if you're able to do so. And next slide, please, Jane. Do a quick poll if we can at the start, just to get kind of a sample of your backgrounds. If you can pick the applicable box, that would be super. Just leave that up on the screen for a couple of minutes. Whilst we're doing that, over the course of the webinar, please keep introducing yourselves in the chat room. And remember, we've got the Q&A session after the panelists have all spoken today. It's the really open, discussive part of the webinar. So please do start to add your questions in there, and we'll get to as many of them as we can with the panelists. Super. Great overview. So a real mix in there as well. Good on the clinical health side, excellent research, civil society, industry. Really nice to see that 10% of lived experience as well. Brilliant. Super. Thank you for that. And next slide, please. So just before I introduce the panelists today, we've got an absolutely excellent lineup. I just wanted to set the scene briefly, if I could. We're only 2 weeks on from the official launch, but we're already asking about implementation, which I think is highly important. I was delighted to join the launch itself a couple of weeks ago, which Dr. Primrose was leading, and Katrine Seher and Dr. Telrun Dua and the team from WHO. But it was only 2 weeks ago, and we were asking ourselves the question, is it too quick to be asking about implementation? And I think the answer to that has to be no, not at all, because these guidelines are really building on the first set of guidelines that were launched a number of years ago. It's an incredible piece of work. I know a huge amount of effort's gone into it. But what it is doing is it's anchoring risk reduction as a core pillar of the national responses to dementia. I think the guidelines are really thought-provoking as well. I'm intrigued by the personal and the kind of the system behavior change that is required and that sits behind these guidelines. And we know that genuinely neither of those is easy to achieve. I think what I've learned from this, and it's important to remember with the recommendations, and look, Primrose will show us this from the WHO perspective as well, is that these build on and complement the first set of guidelines. And that within this, you'll have seen that the conditional nature of many of the recommendations reflects the fact that it's a rapidly evolving space, certainly in terms of the research and the evidence. And I think we're just going to get more and more data and research evidence to build on as the implementation goes on. Quick thought on risk reduction in national dementia plans. If you had asked me this question 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the answer would have been that risk reduction was starting to appear in national dementia plans and national strategies. It has continued to build. We're currently sitting, I think, at somewhere around 30% of governments have developed national dementia plans, 20 more or so in the pipeline. But this 45% of potentially delaying and preventing that is coming out of this risk reduction science means that the risk reduction element, action area 3 of national dementia plans, really needs to be a core pillar, if not the core pillar. And it's certainly the major opportunity for opening up conversations, with ministers and ministries of health. There's a wonderful recent example. Sweden is currently developing its next national dementia plan. And it's actually built around prevention and risk reduction. And I think that's the motivation and the momentum that we need on a global scale. And on that note, 78 million people living with dementia by 2030, 139 by 2050. The only way that we're really going to tackle those future forecast numbers is through risk reduction. All of the other support systems are equally important, but to look at those future figures and to think about how could we potentially reduce them, it's going to have to come through this particular area of work. Um, Also, a quick thought on aligning the risk reduction guidelines. You remember last year, ADI and all of you were involved in getting dementia integrated into the new UN Declaration on Non-Communicable Disease, NCDs. We know so many of the risk factors are shared with other NCDs, and a lot of NCDs are themselves risk factors for dementia. It's really, really important, particularly from a policy point of view, that we start to see that intervention. And then some of the new bits you'll see in the guidelines, things like the inclusion of multi-domain interventions, the work that Mia Kivipelto and Francesca and the team are doing at Worldwide Fingers, and how that's permeating across the planet. And I think Maria later is going to talk about the kind of the Fingers program in Latin America and how important that is. But before we go to the panel, let me pose just a couple of questions to you. When you think about risk reduction, we ourselves in the media, we've got a tendency to be thinking about it before disease or before the condition develops. That's something in the future. It's maybe just a natural inclination. But post-diagnostic risk reduction is absolutely fundamental to the response as well. And Bill Yates on our panel today is going to pick up on that, particularly in his insight and his update. But we are in this incredibly interesting pivotal moment. We've got a revolution going on in diagnostics. We've got new treatments coming to market that are disease modifiers. It's challenging our very thoughts about what is a diagnosis. And it's introducing this idea of a new at-risk category, somewhere in that timeline before symptoms start, when pathology starts, that at-risk moment. And that speaks volumes, I think, for today's webinar. At risk and risk reduction. They're two sides, really, of the same coin. So look, I'm going to end my introduction there and introduce my panel. Remember the Q&A at the end, but we have an absolutely superb lineup today. I've already mentioned Dr. Primrose from World Health Organization, and she is going to give us an update on the risk reduction guidelines. Bill Yates, who's a dementia advocate and ADI board member from Australia, 10 p.m. Bill's time. So thank you for staying up. Matthew, up early with the birds as well. Baumgart, Vice President of Health Policy from the Alzheimer Association. We have Kyla Branch, who's the executive board member for Barbados Alzheimer's Association. Really interested to hear a little bit more about risk reduction in the Caribbean, but also the Healthy Caribbean Coalition as well. We've got Professor Shaihan Williams, Professor of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine and University of Sri Lanka, and also President of Lanka Alzheimer Foundation, a member of ADI. And then finally, Dr. Lucia Crivelli, Head of Neuropsychology at the wonderful FLENI organization and institute in Argentina. who I've mentioned. He's going to speak to us a little bit about the LATAM Fingers project. So, look, without further ado, we're going to move into our panelist speakers. And if I can, Dr. Primrose, can I invite you first to the floor and to give us the update on the guidelines and the immediate response to them over the last few weeks? Primrose, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that overview and the introduction. If I can have the slides, Jane. Yes, thank you. So yes, I'm going to walk you through how evidence was translated into WHO's updated recommendations on dementia risk reduction. Yes, we can go to the next one. Thank you. Dementia risk reduction forms an integral part of the Global Action Plan on the public health response to dementia. And you can access this action plan by scanning the QR code that's at the bottom of the screen. This was adopted in 2017 and it was extended in 2025 so that it runs until 2031. And the action plan has a vision the action plan vision is a world in which dementia can be prevented and people with dementia and their carers live well and receive the care and support they need. But when we look at country level action, we see that there is insufficient risk reduction progress globally, like what Chris was mentioning earlier. And not even half of countries that participated in the last round of data collection, which was in 2024-2025 for WHO's Global Dementia Observatory, have evidence-based national guidelines for dementia risk reduction. And this indicates a clear need for risk reduction guidance. Next slide, please. But why do we need an update of the guidelines? Well, the first edition was published in 2019, and this edition had 14 recommendations on 9 risk factors. And these recommendations were made using evidence that was available up to 2018. So since then, this is 6 years on now of new evidence. And because this evidence base has expanded, we now have new evidence on existing risk factors from 2019, as well as additional risk factors that were not previously included. We also have new evidence on population level and multi-domain interventions, in addition to individual level interventions. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the evidence base has expanded on all levels. So we all know that risk factors for dementia are well established through efforts like the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, Intervention, and Care. We now know what factors can increase our risk of developing dementia, and that's that part in blue on the right. We also know that there are effective interventions to treat these risk factors, and these interventions are also well established. Compared to 2019, we now also have many more existing WHO guidelines that advise us on how to treat those risk factors. But what we don't know, and for what we needed updated evidence for, is on which interventions work to effectively lower dementia risk and ultimately dementia incidence. So that's that question mark that's at the bottom there. So the aim of the updated guidelines is to establish direct intervention evidence for dementia risk reduction. Next slide, please. Okay, so which risk factors did we consider as intervention targets for this guideline update? You see them organized here into 4 different groups. So we have behaviors, health conditions, and biological states, environmental, And the last category is on treating multiple risk factors at once through multi-domain interventions. We have new areas that were added in this guideline update, and these areas are marked by an asterisk, as shown on the screen here. And these are vision impairment, stroke, traumatic brain injury, poor sleep, early or premature menopause, HIV, air pollution, and multi-domain interventions. You'll also see that there are some areas on this slide here that are underlined, which are alcohol, tobacco, physical activity, and dyslipidemia. And for these areas, a scoping review was done, and the evidence was deemed to not have changed significantly in recent years to change the existing recommendation. So for these four areas, the recommendation from 2019 was maintained in this updated guideline. For the rest of the areas, full or partial evidence reviews were conducted. Next slide, please. Okay, so now on this slide, we have a summary of the 2026 recommendations. I'll start with the strong recommendations. So we have 3 strong recommendations, and these are for promoting physical activity, tobacco cessation, and the non-use of dietary supplements in the absence of a diagnosed deficiency for the purpose of reducing dementia risk. So that last strong recommendation is a recommendation against. Then we have 12 recommendations in the guideline that are conditional. And these conditional recommendations reflect largely methodological limitations related to limited, robust long-term trial data, for example. And these pertain to the management of cardiometabolic risk factors and conditions, such as hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, and obesity, as well as promoting healthy, balanced diets, reduction of harmful use of alcohol, and exposure to air pollution. And these factors are commonly shared among non-communicable diseases and emphasize the huge potential for joint and integrated action. But a range of recommendations are also very specific to dementia risk reduction. And these are promoting cognitive activity, social engagement, as well as effective management of hearing loss, and targeting risk factors holistically in tailored multi-domain interventions. The guidelines discourage the use of menopausal hormone therapy in women 65 and older for the specific purpose of reducing dementia risk, and also found insufficient evidence to recommend for or against the use in younger women. So menopausal hormone therapy is the one written MHT there on the slide. We also have other areas where there was insufficient evidence to make a dementia-specific recommendation. And these are management or treatment of vision loss, TBI, traumatic brain injury, stroke, depression, and HIV. And it's important to note that the dementia risk reduction guidelines do not replace existing WHO guidance on the treatment of all of these risk factors. These recommendations remain valid, and relevant tools and references have been included in the dementia guidelines to use clinicians' use. And you can download the guidelines using the QR code that's shown on the slide at the top there. All right, next slide, please, Jane. So while the guideline process is now complete with the launch and publication of the guidelines, which, as Chris mentioned, happened about 2 weeks ago, Our work now continues to drive real world impact. And these recommendations can be used to empower individuals to adopt and maintain healthy behaviors. And this can be done also by dementia associations who may be joining us here today through raising awareness, using knowledge summaries on dementia risk reduction, or having campaign materials that are focused on risk reduction. The recommendations can also be used to strengthen health systems and build partnerships. So working with different programs that are involved in the target areas of this guideline update. So this can include non-communicable diseases, cardiovascular, mental health, and healthy aging programs. It's also important to engage patient organizations and community groups and also collaborate with primary care health providers and to also integrate brain health into existing campaigns. And the greatest population impact will come from advocating for policy change. And this includes creating enabling policies that protect brain health for everyone. And this can be done through inclusion of dementia risk reduction in national dementia plans, promoting equitable access to prevention services, and also championing brain health across different sectors. So not just health, but even also including the environmental sector or even education. Next slide, please, Jane. Now I would like to hear your initial impressions of these updated guidelines. And a few short questions will now appear on your screen. I think Jane will bring them out now. Yeah. If you can take a minute to complete these questions as they are appearing on the screen. And we'll just, yeah, give you a few minutes for you to complete them. If you're done completing the poll or the questions, you can also type in the chat that you're done, and then Jane can give us the results. We will use this information to inform our dissemination activities, our implementation activities, and also to inform some of the training programs that we are working on. All right, I'm seeing in the chat a lot of people are saying they are done. Yeah. I think, Jane, you can show us the results if you have them. Okay, so it's good to see that the guidelines are relevant to most of our work and personal situations. And also that they're feasible. Almost of us agree that the guidelines are feasible to use in our context. And the different challenges, I think for each of the responses we have here, I think it is a challenge in different contexts. And we will take this information into consideration as we plan our implementation activities. Thank you, Jane. You can go to the next slide. Right, so let me finish by thanking all our contributors who made this guideline update possible, our guideline development group members, our evidence review teams, our peer reviewers, people with lived experience, and also our WHO colleagues who have all actively or behind the scenes played an important role. And our contributors were from all over the globe, as you can see in the map here. Thank you very much. And in the next slide, you can also see the QR code that you can use to download the guidelines. Thank you.
Primrose,
Over to you, Chris.
thanks so much, Primrose. That was great. I think that's maybe the third or the fourth time that I've seen this kind of presentation element to it, and every time I see it, more of it becomes clearer, I think, for me. There's something really important about this building on the last set of guidelines and complementing the last set of guidelines, and that it's not in isolation to itself. And I think that that's coming across really clearly. Thank you so much for that. I thought there was something also very interesting about the dementia-specific elements of the research evidence. Really interested to start to tease that out once we get into the discussion as well. Talking a lot in there about things like building partnerships. How do you do that when you're thinking about the dementia-specific risk reduction, when you're talking to people perhaps that are working in the areas of stroke or obesity or diabetes? Or I think there's some really nice synergies in there. So Primrose, thank you. That was wonderful. And Bill, I'm going to invite you to take the floor and give us your insights into this space, if you would. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. It is my pleasure to be here today to speak about the updated guidelines that were released by the World Health Organization nearly 2 weeks ago. Throughout the world, there are more than 57 million people living with dementia, with almost 10 million people receiving a new diagnosis every year. Unless we act now, this number is projected to reach 139 million by the year 2050. This is important because research suggests that up to 45% of dementia cases are linked to modified risk factors. This is why these updated guidelines represent such an important milestone in our understanding of brain health. They provide clear, evidence-based recommendations that can be put into practice today to help protect the cognitive health of people throughout their lifetime. However, publishing guidelines is only the beginning. The real challenge is helping people understand why these recommendations matter, supporting them to make meaningful changes, and creating environments where healthier choices become easier. Brain health is not simply a medical issue. It also needs to become an economic, educational, and social priority. This is why Alzheimer's Disease International and its 105 member organisations have such an important role to play. As the peak global body for dementia, ADI is uniquely positioned to work alongside the World Health Organization, governments, and our member organizations to help translate these recommendations into practical action. National dementia organizations are often the first point of contact following a diagnosis of dementia, and increasingly the go-to place for people worried about developing dementia. They are trusted sources of information, support, and hope. They understand their local health systems, cultural contexts, and everyday realities faced by people living with dementia and their families. This places them in a unique position to transform scientific evidence into practical resources that people can understand and, more importantly, use. However, implementing these guidelines cannot become the responsibility of dementia organisations by themselves. It requires collaboration from all sectors of our society. Schools can provide healthy brain development from childhood. Employers can create healthy workplaces. Communities can reduce isolation and encourage active lifestyles. Healthcare professionals can identify risk factors earlier and provide personalised support. Researchers can continue to strengthen the evidence, while governments can provide coordinated leadership through the development of national brain health strategies. Brain health should not belong to one profession or one sector. I believe it is the responsibility of everyone. When I was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's disease in 2019, I faced the same challenges. I could have focused on everything dementia was taking away from me. Instead, I chose to focus on what I still could do. I made deliberate changes that helped me stay physically active, mentally alert, socially engaged, and connected to a sense of purpose. At the time, I wasn't following a set of guidelines. I was simply trying to build the best life I could after my diagnosis. Looking back, I now realize that many of those everyday choices closely reflect the evidence contained within these updated WHO guidelines. To stay active, I walk my dog every morning. I even learned how to swim again, so I could compete in masters events and return as a volunteer surf lifesaver. I challenged my mind by reading, writing, and speaking at conferences and contributing to dementia research. I nurtured my relationships with family, friends, and my grandchildren because those connections give my life meaning. I continued to be a volunteer and an advocate, as helping others gives purpose to my life. That is why I believe we should not think about risk factors in isolation. Our lives are multidimensional, and our support should also be that. The WHO guidelines recognise this as their multi-main interventions refer to a range of risk factors being grouped together. Rather than just focusing only on reducing factors, we should also help people to discover meaningful activities that naturally incorporate these protective behaviors into their everyday lives. When activities have personal meaning, they become enjoyable. When they are enjoyable, people continue doing them. It's that consistency over months and years that creates lasting change. As a member of the Alzheimer's Disease International and a peer reviewer of these guidelines, I hope our 105 member organisations and the 20 more that we have in our development program will embrace these guidelines as an opportunity to strengthen partnerships with their governments, healthcare providers, researchers, and the community around the world. Together, we can transform these evidence-based guidelines into practical action through education, raising public awareness, and providing person-centered support that reaches all people throughout their lives. The WHO has given us more than a set of guidelines. It has given us a roadmap for protecting brain health. But a roadmap only changes lives when people choose to follow it. I believe by working together, we can change the projected future burden of dementia while helping millions more live longer, healthier, and more meaningful lives. Thank you.
Bill, wonderful as always. Thank you for your insights into that. I think you touch on something that hopefully is going to come out into the discussion in the Q&A quite a lot, which is behavioral change in response to the recommendations. I think at a personal level, we all know how difficult behavior change is, how to modify is difficult, but then at community, society level and at government level, how do we start to build evidence that behavioral change is actually working into real world evidence? So, Bill, look, thank you so much for that. I really, really appreciate it. And next, we're going to hear from Matthew Baumgart. Before we move on, let me just, if I can, Bill is currently one of our members of our what we call our Global Dementia Expert Panel, our GDP. This is a group of individuals that we bring together to share their kind of expertise and advice, through their lived experience. And we want to grow the size of this panel. If you were in Lyon, you'll have seen we were doing some initial outreach work for it. The GDP is looking to expand, particularly into some key areas. We'd really like to hear from more people living with dementia and their carers in Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East, Asia, Pacific, and in Africa. Next slide, please, Jane. We've got a couple of examples in terms of the kind of the testimonies from Samantha and for Amy, and then the following slide as well. But really, just a simple request at this point is if you are at all interested or know somebody that you think might be suitable in this advisory capacity, please do get in touch with us. The QR code was there, or message us afterwards, and we can send you the details. Just as a working example, next month we're going to hold two roundtables at two different time zones, bringing together this kind of voice of lived experience to start to look at a couple of really important areas. One of them is about earlier diagnosis and risk reduction. And to start to capture that voice of people living with a diagnosis and carers as well is becoming more and more important in our work, in our communications, in our campaigning, our policy work. And next slide, please. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Matthew Baumgart. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Matthew and his team in London a couple of weeks ago, where they hosted AAIC. I think there was over 1,100 people under that roof for the entire week, which was absolutely superb. But one of the core elements of it that was coming out time and time again in the research was this area of risk reduction. So, Matthew, I'm going to give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. You were off by 1-0. It was nearly 11,000 people, not
Oh,
1,100
sorry,
people.
11,000.
So,
My apologies. Yeah.
thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here today. You can go on to the next slide. And I'm going to start with a slide that from Primrose's presentation. And that's the triangle where she explained what the WHO guidelines were looking at, that dotted line across the bottom, the question they were trying to answer with the guidelines. And as she noted, there's still a lot more research that was needed. Most of the recommendations that are made by the WHO are conditional recommendations, and we do need a lot more science to strengthen that line across the bottom. If you go to the next slide, what the association, what I'm going to talk about is what the association is doing to address brain health in the United States. But we are basing it on the solid line that of what the risk factors are that are well established. We believe we need to strengthen the evidence on interventions. We think that's really, really important. But at the same time, we don't think we should just sit around and wait till the strengthening of the evidence on interventions plays itself out. We think there is strong enough evidence on what the risk factors are, that those are well enough established that we should begin to address them in communities across our country. Next slide. So this is the framework we use. From a public health perspective, historically, public health has just, told people the information and then hoped that they would do something about it. But we found over time that you're more likely to be successful in prevention campaigns, no matter what that is, whether it's for injury or cancer, or in our case, cognitive decline and dementia. You're more likely to be successful if you address an issue from multiple levers of this public health spectrum. So as I run through what we're doing, and I'm going to run through very quickly, there are links on the bottom of each slide so you can go and find out more information. But as I run through these, note how we're trying to attack the issue across this spectrum using multiple different levels. So if you go to the next slide. So Rethink Your Brain is our overarching campaign. This is the platform under which we engage the public. It starts with what we call a 6-step challenge, 6 things you can do right away. And it's really where we place all of our work so that there is a consistent theme across whatever we're doing. Next slide. And one of the things that we're doing is what we call the Brain Health Habit Builder. This is an online tool where people can answer a handful of questions about their current lifestyle habits as well as their health status, and then get responses and help develop their own personal action plan on how they can make their brains healthier, the steps they can take. And it includes something where you can, if you want to, you can print it out and put it on your refrigerator or your bathroom mirror, because the evidence shows that if you see and remind yourself of the promise you're making to yourself every day, you're more likely to stick to that promise, and that'll be better to make those habits stick long term. Next slide. So our 10 Healthy Habits for Your Brain is a public awareness campaign focusing on the 10 things that the Alzheimer's Association believes has the strongest evidence to date in terms of the science on cognitive decline and possibly dementia. It also includes an education program that's delivered in the community, both in person and virtual, as well as a program that we call an awareness presentation that's a very quick 20-minute presentation that is used a lot of times in libraries or at workplaces during lunch and learn type sessions. Next slide. To educate providers, we have a program in our Project Echo platform. Project Echo is a virtual training platform in which you can build almost any learning module. And we have several learning modules to train providers. This particular learning module that we developed is about brain health and what primary care teams can do in communicating with their patients about improving their brain health and steps that individual patients can take and what doctors can do to encourage that action among their patients. Next slide. There is a theory that the more people in the fight, the better. And so rather than one agent acting alone, and so we have launched what we call our Brain Health Roundtable. This convenes organizations, and you can see the 18 organizations that are part of this effort, from pharma companies to providers to organizations that represent and work on the specific risk factors like the American Diabetes Association and the Physical Activity Alliance. And we're hoping that a broader movement for brain health, and by driving collective action, we can have a greater impact and increase our chances of success in improving brain health. Next slide. Our Brain Health at Work program is geared toward employers. It allows businesses to take an organizational assessment to see how brain healthy their workplace is in terms of their policies and practices. It gives them access to some tools and resources and ways that they can help their workers, their employees, improve their brain health. Next slide. And lastly, the Alzheimer's Association, in a project funded through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States, is the Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Risk Reduction. And our goal here is to work with public health agencies from a policy perspective, state, local, and tribal public health agencies, getting them to understand the science, helping them to prioritize action and mobilize communities and address policy issues so that, again, we're not the only ones in the community talking about brain health, but you have governmental public health agencies out taking action in their own communities. So next slide. So that's a very quick survey of things the association has going on. I appreciate the time, and please email me at any time if you want more information or have any questions. Chris?
Matthew, thank you. That was excellent whirlwind tour of an amazing amount of work. I really like this kind of concept of the habit builder. We touched on it with Bill as well, that how do you influence behavioral change and how do you measure that? So I think hopefully that'll come out a little bit later in the Q&A as well. And I really liked your round table, bringing all of those stakeholders together. Primrose's slide earlier on was looking at who are all those players and those parties to it. But within that, you had organizations like the American Diabetes Association, and they themselves will have been through this process and can share thoughts and advice. But a real goal for me would be to start to see dementia-related risk information appearing in other conditions, communications as well, and vice versa. Look, thank you for that. Absolutely brilliant few slides. And now we're going to move on to Kayla Branch from the Barbados Alzheimer's Association. Kayla, we've done a good deal of work in the Caribbean region in terms of awareness raising, but I know it's a particular area and particularly around non-communicable disease, which is one of the biggest challenges in the region. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. A lovely morning to all from the beautiful island of Barbados. I wish to thank ADI and WHO for the invitation to present at the forum this morning. And I also wish to acknowledge and thank the Barbados Alzheimer's Association membership, past and present, particularly our late past president and founder, Pamelia Burton, on whose shoulders we stand. Barbados, excuse me, is an independent island nation and a republic in the English-speaking Caribbean, with a population of just over 280,000 persons. We're proud to have a high global ranking of centenarians per capita, and Barbados does have a rapidly aging society driven by long life expectancies and low birth rates. The most recent census already shows that 1 in 5 Barbadians is over the age of 65, and 1 in 4 over the age of 60. It is expected that by 2050, 1 out of every 2 Barbadians will be over the age of 60. The 2023 to 2028 National Policy on Aging seeks to rationalize how older persons are seen in society and offer protection. And the policy recognizes the importance of strengthening community geriatric services, providing home and respite care, expanding preventative healthcare systems, and integration of social and health systems. So we must prepare not just to survive this demographic change, but to thrive in spite of it. And as we know, while age is the strongest risk factor for dementia, dementia is not an inevitable part of aging. As we have seen through the Lancet Commission and, of course, the recent WHO guidelines, there are many modifiable risk factors for dementia, which are well within our control. Any intervention that is able to delay or prevent the onset of dementia by targeting modifiable risk factors has the potential to significantly reduce its future prevalence, and also by extension, reduce the impact, financial, social, health impacts on society at large. So we must pattern proactive resilience, building an even stronger low-risk society that can withstand future shocks. And of course, translating the science of modifiable risk factors into actionable public health habits is essential for reducing future burden of dementia. And as every National Dementia Association fully appreciates, I am quite sure, multi-sectoral engagement and multi-domain action is a must. Within our civil society nonprofit organizations, there's ever limited resource, and better use of resources must always be a consideration. So the Barbados Alzheimer's Association works with government, private sector parties. This is crucial. Policy and primary care integration to embed the WHO targets into primary care screening, leveraging of existing policy and cross-collaborative effort, of course, as dementia affects us all directly and indirectly. And so therefore, we must engage with our NCD community. As we know, in 2025, dementia was formally recognized within the UN Political Declaration on NCDs and mental health as a leading NCD. And the shared risk factors between dementia and other NCDs, of course, cements the importance of integrated health messaging. And therefore, partnership with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, a regional alliance of health and civil society organizations working to reduce the burden of NCDs in Caribbean populations, is very much aligned. We have partnered with HCC to spread dementia awareness throughout their online platform, the HCC News Roundup. And the use of HCC Roundup informs on regional public health updates. It helps persons to discover advocacy campaigns and access actionable resources. The HCC Roundup actually will be used to share these new WHO guidelines on dementia prevention to maximize the public health impact. And of course, public campaigns can simultaneously address multiple chronic outcomes, making prevention simpler and more cost-effective for health systems. Of course, that being said, we also want to take a look at our youth engagement. The project, as you can see on the screen, looks at enhancing youth public awareness about Alzheimer's prevention through risk factor education and support for individuals managing the condition. And so the Barbados Alzheimer's Association, in partnership with the Make a Book Project, the Ministry of Education Transformation, the National Library Service, sought to engage primary school students aged 6 to 10 years in a storybook competition. And of course, the idea is that the young student authors create storybooks with online editions shared throughout the national summer camps for young persons to read. And this year, in addition to the storybook titled Forget Me Not Garden, the association will have fun inbound sessions with campers, highlighting the lifestyle changes that can be implemented from a young age. The key message is to recognize that it is never too early to support brain health and reduce risk. Additionally, engagement with student doctors, nurses, EMTs is key and empowers future clinicians to address modifiable risk factors, shifting the mindset from treating dementia as a condition where there is no hope to managing risk and preserving function. Of course, universal advice and universal health advice often fails if it ignores local traditions and social networks. And so we must leverage our local culture and community in dementia risk reduction, as it helps to build trust, minimize social isolation, and tailor health messaging. Group physical and social events fit naturally into community spaces, lowering isolation that speeds up cognitive decline. So partnership with local churches, service clubs, malls, schools, cultural shows. Of course, we can leverage local celebrities and community leaders to help tailor our messaging as well. And I wanted to leave you with, excuse me, I wanted to leave you with this slide, which speaks to what we call in Barbados Q in the community. And Q in the community is a cultural movement that unites Barbadians through music, storytelling, and communal spirit. Q actually is the link to Q 100.7 FM radio station, which started this community effort as a broadcast, and it has blossomed into Q in the community as we see it in the Barbadian landscape today. I wanted to show the video as it not only highlights a 99-year-old Barbadian man embracing physical activity and showcasing active living as we all should, but it also speaks to social interaction, which is beneficial to cognitive reserve. Unfortunately, we can't see the video. However, I'll go to the final slide because ultimately, dementia risk reduction for all of us, for every person, remains relevant at any age, at all ages. And our hope is to create lasting change in Barbadian schools, workplaces, supermarkets, to make healthy choices and embrace lifestyle changes early, to enable and promote healthy and active aging, incorporating risk factor modification as a way of life for all Barbadians. And additionally, of great importance, teaching citizenship, responsibility, and morality to the younger generation through intergenerational interaction, as we all strive to create the dementia inclusive communities, of course, which we all would love to attain. Thank you very much.
Kyla, thank you so much for that. It's a real shame that the video didn't play. I had it
I
on.
know, right?
Look, we'll share the link with everybody. I had it on loop yesterday afternoon whilst I was working away at my desk because it was just so addictive to listen to as well. So we'll share the link to it. Something just to pick up on very briefly from your presentation was the youth engagement and using the kind of the positive angle of brain health to get them engaged is something very kind of important, I think, about the language around brain health as a conversation starter, a door opener, But something that it strikes me very strongly is it destigmatizes as well at the same time. So as well as starting the conversation, it's doing something else entirely. Look, so Kayla, thank you so much for that.
Thank
Quick
you.
reminder to use the Q&A box if you want to start posting questions. And we've got two more speakers to come up before we get to our Q&A session. And really pleased to welcome Professor Shehan Williams. And Shehan, I know you're going to give us kind of an indication around implementation of the new guidelines in Sri Lanka. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. It's a privilege to be able to speak at this webinar, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Sri Lanka, as you know, is a middle-income country in South Asia. We, interestingly, have the fastest aging population in the region. Therefore, dementia risk reduction is very relevant to us as our proportion of older folk keep increasing. Now, the Lanka Alzheimer's Foundation, which I represent as the president, is the only organization in Sri Lanka solely dedicated to work, to advocate, and to specifically promote the cause of dementia in Sri Lanka. Interestingly, Sri Lanka is in a stage where many preventive measures have been beneficial and very useful in terms of reducing many of the communicable as well as non-communicable diseases. But sadly, dementia has not come to the forefront as yet, and it is our role to work closely with Alzheimer's Disease International, which we are a part of, to implement the dementia action plan. And definitely risk reduction will be at the core of the work that we do. Next slide, please. So Sri Lanka, though, is happy to have established 12,000 elders societies across the island, even in the far corners, in the villages as well as the towns, we have elders gathering together. And this we found as the key point of entry to introduce the risk reduction strategies to the people and to the elders living out there who need to continue living an active life. So as we looked in our sort of report that I was happy to be part of as a GDG member, it's key that many of the risk factors for brain health go beyond just the risk factors for the other NCDs like hypertension or cardiovascular activities. For instance, activity or physical activity is generally promoted for everyone. However, for brain health, we need to also keep our brain active and stimulated, cognitively involved, and so on and so forth. So just perhaps promoting exercise alone may not be good enough. It would be better if people can be engaged in other forms. So we've started engaging the elder societies, and our advocacy teams do visit the groups and encourage not just the simple activities, but also engaging in drama and dancing and other forms of activities, which are very much a part of many of our cultures, like we saw in Barbados, as in our previous presentation. Next slide, please. So we are now, as much as we are advocating the 14 risk reduction factors in our local languages, which we now distribute to all these elders groups and keep people encouraged and motivated to do something about their brain health, we have to integrate the latest guidelines into the activities that we are doing. And we look forward to this great challenge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, so in terms of the theory of change, where we want risk reduction to be part of every individual's life and part of the end goal of making Sri Lanka an elderly friendly society with the ability to maximize the health of people living in a meaningful and dignified way. We work with the broader sector in terms of policy change. And this is the theory of change I was able to develop with the WHO office in Sri Lanka, where very much the risk reduction factors will contribute to the overall health of our elderly population. It would result or in intersectoral collaborations. We have the social services, we have the health services, we have other community resources, both government and non-government, as well as elderly people taking responsibility for their own health through these societies to live a meaningful and brain healthy life, which prevents dementia, but also promotes the dementia reduction strategies. So next slide, please. Yes, so yeah. So activities are very much a part of our center, and this is where we engage in so many stimulating activities, including cognitive stimulation and other factors where young adults also mingle with older adults to promote the brain health and keep everyone active. And we hope that this would be very much a part of every community in Sri Lanka, where elders meet regularly, stimulate each other, keep their brain active, and fulfill their obligation in terms of reducing their risk of having to live with dementia. So thank you very much for listening to me and getting a taste of what we are doing across the country to keep the dementia guidelines for risk reduction active. Thank you.
Jehan, thank you so much. Really nice to see the insights. Also, really nice to see the infographic that's been adapted as well around the risk factors. And it reminds me that at ADI we need to do the updated version of that and start to circulate that as quickly as we can. Just in terms of your work in Sri Lanka, I know we have an amazing opportunity, and that our regional director, DY Suhaya, is going to be coming over to spend some time in the country. It feels like there's great momentum there to get the national dementia plan fully developed and into implementation. And I think risk reduction obviously is going to be right at the heart of that. So thank you so much. Look, we're going to move to our final speaker of the webinar, Dr. Lucia Crivelli from Fleni in Argentina. And Lucia, I know you're going to give us some kind of integration around the LATAM Fingers project, which is incredibly dovetailed, I think, with this, but also just in terms of the risk reduction guidelines and implementation within the region as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to ADI and also to the WHO. I will be presenting the Latin Fingers trial and how this articulates or engages with the risk reduction guidelines. Let me check if I can. So the Latin Fingers project was funded by the Alzheimer's Association, and I have no other conflicts of interest to report. As we already know, why this matters? This matters because in low and middle income countries, most of the population with dementia are expected to increase drastically in the next years because we have very high modifiable risk factors. If you see this slide from a paper that compares several countries in Latin America, the average is 54% of the cases of dementia could be prevented in comparison with what happens in worldwide, which is 45%. So there's a 10-point difference, which is extremely higher in some countries, like, for example, in Chile, where the risk factors account for 62% of the cases. So regarding the WHO recommendations, I would like to emphasize this new recommendation to reduce the risk of cognitive decline or dementia. Specifically tailored multi-domain interventions may be offered. And that is what we did in Latin Fingers. Following the previous guidelines, we addressed several risk factors at the same time in a very tailored manner. So in Latin Fingers, what we asked ourselves is, can a culturally adapted multi-domain lifestyle intervention protect cognition in older adults at risk of dementia in Latin America? And for this, we designed a multi-domain intervention, which was inspired in the original Finger trial and also in our sister trial, the US Pointer trial, which is another worldwide finger trial, but led by the Laura Baker and her team in the US. And we tackled basically 5 factors: physical exercise, a healthy diet, cognitive stimulation, cardiovascular control, and socialization, which I understand it's also a very important modification in the new guidelines. So these 5 factors are the 5 pillars of our intervention. And importantly, we intervened over 2 groups. One group received a very structured, intensive intervention in which these 5 pillars were followed up with high frequency. And another group received the same recommendations for the same 5 interventions, but was not in contact with the team so frequently. And they had to engage in these activities like physical activity, cognitive stimulation, socialization, nutrition by themselves. So one received information and the other one received treatment. The countries that were involved were 12 countries in Latin America, and we had more than 1,000 participants at risk of dementia because of cardiovascular risk factors and because of a suboptimal cognitive performance. And we had as you can see in the graph, we had a very diverse population in terms of education and also in terms of ethnicity. The results were very positive, and it's nice to say that they were positive for both groups. The flexible lifestyle intervention group, the line that you can see in blue, they also improved cognition. And this was not because of practice effects, because both groups had the same practice effects in the assessment. This had to do with receiving information, proper information about brain health makes a change. But we have to admit that the systematic lifestyle intervention group improved 55% more than the flexible group. So receiving facilities to a structured lifestyle intervention makes a very big difference. This global change was also seen in the different domains, also in episodic memory, also in executive function and processing speed. And this is important because this is the first trial to find effects in all of the subdomains of the cognitive subdomains. It's the first one to find changes in episodic memory. So this is a big breakthrough, and we think it has to do with having a population that at baseline had more risk factors than the one tested in the other trials. So the big takeaways for this is that multi-domain interventions are effective, that adaptation to culture and context is essential. We had a very, very high adherence of our participants to the intervention, and this had to do with tailoring the interventions to the context. We took the learnings from the US pointer mainly, but adapted those protocols to our own culture. And also a very big learning that I'm very proud of is that Latin America now can not only receive information from global trials on prevention, but we can generate our own evidence. So WHO provides a very useful roadmap, and Latin Fingers can show that this can be implemented in Latin America. If you're interested, we published our results in a paper in the Lancet, so you can read the article and see the details about the implementation, about the harmonization and the structure of the interventions. Thank you. I have to show this slide. I have to thank the participants without whom this project would not have been possible. So we have more than 1,000 participants, 100 from each country. Thank you.
Lucia, great. I'm glad you focused on that last slide as well, because the kind of the visual representation of how many people are involved in activity like this is absolutely incredible. Thanks so much. Look, I was really taken as well by the kind of the regional variation in some of the risk factor percentages. Up 54% to 62%. It's absolutely eye-opening when you start to see figures like that. So thank you so much. Look, we've got about 5 minutes left. I also wanted to say a quick thank you to Primrose, Matthew, and a few of the others. There's been lots of questions posted in the Q&A, and the panel have been diving in and answering those questions as we've been going, which is an absolutely great way to tackle some of these. But we do have about 5 minutes left, so we'll get into a little bit more Q&A if we can. I've got a few lined up from people that have messaged in. The first one I'm going to direct, Primrose, this is really for you. It's about implementation in low resource settings. And the question is coming from Zimbabwe, but the updated guidelines are evidence-based, but many low and middle income countries have limited specialist services. What practical low-cost implementation strategies does WHO recommend for countries where dementia awareness, diagnosis, and specialist care remain limited?
Sure, thank you, Chris, for that question. I think in low resource settings, it's important to integrate this dementia risk reduction messaging into already existing programs. So programs such as non-communicable diseases, aging, mental health, I think these form a good platform to start talking about dementia risk reduction and also to raise awareness of all these risk factors and interventions.
Super, super. Um, I'm going to pick up on something that Lucia mentioned as well, and kind of dovetail it into Matthew's area. Lucia mentioned that a lot of the insight was coming from the American Pointer study, and Matthew, in the brain health work and in the habit builder, how integrated is that with the US Pointer in terms of the kind of the two-way exchange of data and information and learning?
Yeah, so the the habit builder and in fact all of our materials are based not only on the epidemiological and population level research, which was, if you think back to Primrose's triangle, was the arm on the left. The great thing about what US Pointer is, because this is really kind of the point Primrose was making with the triangle, is that from the population and epidemiological evidence, we know things that cause increased risk. The great thing about the pointer, the finger, now Latin American finger, or now Latin American fingers, is that we have an intervention that addresses multiple of those risk factors at the same time, but that intervention actually shows gains and improvements in people's cognition. So that takes us from we know this is a risk factor to you can do something about the risk factor and have a positive influence. And I think that's the significance of Lucia's study and US Pointer and Finger. But I will say that, the elements of the intervention are all things that were part of that right-hand part of Primrose's triangle, right? It's exercise, it's diet, it's cognitive engagement, and it's heart health monitoring. And so all of those things are integrated into the specific habit builder that you mentioned, but all of the association's efforts.
Super. I'm really pleased in this kind of next iteration of the guidelines, just how strongly the multi-domain approach is starting to come across. Thank you so much for that. Bill, if I can I come to you? And I think how you articulated the kind of the impact and the changes on your habits and your lifestyle, I think is a brilliant example for us about the individual interventions that we can make. But can you kind of wear two hats with that? Just in terms of how important it was for you, certainly post-diagnosis, to receive information about risk reduction. Was it readily available, or did you have to go and hunt it out? And is that changing? Are you seeing a change in the flow of information around it?
I think I'm of that vintage 7 years ago. Then when I was diagnosed, there was very little information. I did walk away from my appointment with a range of things that I could do, but that's limited. But I do see, as the years have progressed, I'm seeing a whole change in that there is more information available for carers, for people living with dementia, and I think that's a really good thing. Like even, for example, these risk factors, whereas they don't mean much to me in terms of preventing dementia because I have dementia, but that doesn't change their importance. They're really important because for me, they're a way that I gain control and over my life. I want to be able to live a life that I can enjoy, one that has meaning and purpose. And I find a lot of the risk factors are exactly what I'm using to gain that self-concept back again, that I feel they give me a quality of life that I'm happy with. And I think that's probably the answer I look for.
Magic. I think there's something that is really interesting about the slowing down of progression message versus the prevention message, and both elements of that continuum are equally important. Um, Probably got time for one more very, very quick question. Oh, I'm actually, I am out of time. My screen is flashing at me. Keller, I was just about to ask you about the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, but I will come back to you about that. Um, Look, let me round it up there. I want to say a massive thank you to the panelists. I always feel with this area of risk reduction that there is so much to unravel and to dig into. And something like the update to the guidelines is a perfect platform for us to keep that conversation going. The policy person in me wants to see how that starts to permeate through policy, from research into policy, then particularly into practice, and how, as Matthew was saying, it's this circular flow of information, real world evidence coming back from the practice. So thank you all for joining us. We really do appreciate it. We will make the recording and the slides available very quickly, and we'll continue to answer any further questions that were posted in the Q&A. So enjoy the rest of your days, whether that's evening, midday, or breakfast time for you, and we'll see you online very soon. So thank you again, and goodbye from us all.